Good evening, everyone. My name is Cadet Rump, and welcome to our Forged in Fire podcast. Before we get started, I want to give a special thank you to Cadet Justin Venencia for being my Zoom coordinator. But this evening, we have a very special guest with us tonight. We have Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker is a retired United States Army Ranger. He has spent nearly 10 years in law enforcement, and he is a part of the Tillman Scholar Foundation. But I won't speak too much on him. I'll let him introduce himself. Mr. Baker, the floor is yours.
Hey, thanks everyone. I really appreciate the invitation. It's an honor to be here. So just to tell you guys a little bit about myself, I joined the Army when I was 18, enlisted, just did one enlistment. I was stationed up at Fort Lewis in Washington State with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. This was before September 11th, so my experiences are very different than a lot of other veterans nowadays. So the fact that you guys volunteered and after in this day and age really says something about you. So first of all, thank you very much for your service. While I only did one enlistment, I've maintained a strong connection with the military. I'm a Tillman Scholar, so the Pat Tillman Foundation funds my research, and I have a strong network in the veteran communities and try to stay attuned to these types of the issues that veterans are facing. So when I got out of the military, I went to university, then began a career in law enforcement. I was in law enforcement for about 9 years, worked in a variety of roles from patrol, detective positions, worked as an instructor at the police academy, training new police recruits, worked on crowd control squads and a variety of other assignments. During that time, I encountered deadly force situations, was involved with one myself and was forced to take a life at work. In 2014, I decided to make a transition and to move from law enforcement into an academic role and study policing. A few months after I decided to make that jump was when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and it became a real national issue, police use of deadly force. So I've relocated to St. Louis. I live about a mile from where Michael Brown was killed and work on issues related to police use of force, and specifically police use of deadly force, but also investigate other ways that people die when they come into contact with the police. And the goal of the research is basically to identify changes that can be made to reduce the likelihood that a life is taken by law enforcement. So that's kind of who I am and where I'm at now. And again, thank you so much for your service and for the invitation. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. That was awesome. Now, what motivated you to join the military?
Well, my dad had been in the Army. He was the 173rd in Vietnam. My grandfather was worked in the Navy during the Second World War. And my great-grandfather was in the First World War, so it was kind of the family business. And in my growing up, part of becoming a man at that point in my life, and I used a gendered language because that's what it was for me, was doing your service. It was something that I just thought and had been raised that was something that was an obligation that we all had. And I don't think that's necessarily true for a lot of people anymore, but I know that there are still a lot of families, and I'm sure there are some of you guys and women in here who join for similar reasons. And I also I wanted to get away. I wanted some independence. I wanted to live life, maybe travel, have some exciting experiences. So that was kind of the reason. I was a stupid kid. That played a role too.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, we thank you for everything you've done for this country. We know the military and law enforcement takes a very special person to be in those shoes. So thank you for that. Well, as many of you might know, our intended topic for this night is military ethics and decision making, which is very important to military service and your leadership. So we're going to jump right into it, Mr. Baker. At the end, we do ask any of the audience, if you have any questions for Mr. Baker, please submit them in the chat. And at the end, if we have time, we'll go through any questions the audience might have, all right? So ethics, it's a tough topic, all right? So ethics at its core is something that it means doing the right thing and something every soldier should carry. But can you tell me, Mr. Baker, why is ethics, doing the right thing, and following orders important in the military?
All right, am I going to be out of line if I use a Spider-Man reference? Is that okay?
No, no, go ahead.
Well, I'm sure you may have heard it before, but the Peter Parker, his uncle tells him, with great power comes great responsibility. Hopefully, I didn't butcher the line, but I think there's truth to that. So when you join you join the United States military, you're joining the most powerful fighting force in the history of mankind. I mean, I don't think we can really argue with that. And with that power comes a great deal of responsibility. The rules of engagement that are created by the institution, they're there to prevent misuse of that power. It's meant to control people because we're all fallible, human beings. They make mistakes. They do things that they wish they hadn't done later on. So we create, and there are people who are frankly just, not necessarily the greatest folks in the world, who are looking for opportunities to abuse power. So creating a set of ethical guidelines and instilling those in your soldiers and your NCOs and especially your officers, that creates an environment where power is under control. And when that power is utilized, it's utilized with intention and with a purpose because it's necessary, not because somebody is out of control or acting a fool. I mean, it can have an impact. And it's not just about, maybe using deadly force while you're on a deployment when it shouldn't have happened or something along those lines, but it's the way that you treat people with ethics, with respect, with dignity. A good friend of mine he's part of the Tillman Foundation as well. My friend Ali was a young boy in Iraq, in Baghdad during the surge. And his dad was a translator for the American government, and the soldiers that he interacted with, they expressed this set of ethics, this honor that he fell in love with. Eventually became a refugee. His father was killed. He came to the United States as a young man, went on to serve in the military himself, and now works for the United States government. So it's not just a matter of, these tangible things. Oh, we killed someone when we shouldn't. We shot some when we shouldn't. We violated some clear rule. It's about holding high ethical standards because you're sending a message to the audience that when you're out operational. But it's not just. It doesn't just apply to the people we're using power again in a traditional sense of the word, like going and using military power. It's also the power you have it's the people that you have power over. So as officers and NCOs, you have a lot of power over the people you command. The men and women, they have far less power than you do, and because of that, they rely on you. You have an obligation to them. You're responsible for their welfare, their well-being, their ethical standards, the things that they do that they're going to have to live with. So I think that ethics are even more important for you when you're in a position of leadership, and having a strong sense of ethics and having a sense of obligation to the people out in the wider community and to the people underneath of you can have long-term effects and can affect the lives of the people you work for the rest of their lives. I remember being a young private in the Army and having Sergeant Sadberry. He was a sergeant first class. And he was the scariest person on the planet, for sure. I still think that. And I thought he was an old man, but now looking back, I realize he was in his 20s. But I was recently married. My wife and I were having she was having some problem with her paperwork because she was moving from abroad. And the care that he showed, and this is the person it's a very tough environment at a Ranger battalion. You don't get a lot of love and sensitivity from your leadership, but he cared, and he took the time to recognize that there was something amiss, that wasn't right, and he was willing to put his professional and personal capital on the line to defend the people and take care of the people that he had an obligation to, which were the people he had power over. So I guess the short answer is with great power comes great responsibility, not only to the people that maybe you may be opposing or you're not sure if you're opposing, but also the people underneath of you.
Well, that's excellent. I do agree. You bring up some solid points. power can be very misused depending on which hands it get into. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Now, can you think of a time you were faced with an ethical dilemma in the military, and how did you approach it?
Okay, well, I think no matter what you're doing in life, you're going to face ethical dilemmas. There are going to be things that you don't think are right, and there'll be times when you stand up and do something about it, and then there are going to be times when you don't. And for me, one of the things that stands out is a failure on my part. So I was new in the army, had just gotten to my battalion, and I know things have changed a lot, but back then there was a really a very vigorous hazing culture that existed. It was extrajudicial. It wasn't planned by the institution and instituted by the institution. It was something that evolved organically, where at the end of the end of shift, when the bosses said, the squad leader came in and said, "Okay, guys, you're off for the day." I would, when you're brand new, I would run down the hall and try to leave the barracks, because I knew that the senior guys were going to haze the junior guys. And then when I started to get a little bit, and I was no longer the junior guy, and I was like responsible for a gun team I engaged in that behavior as well. I didn't get into some of the harder stuff, the things that really did cross the line, but I witnessed some things. I knew that there were, people being hazed in ways that they really shouldn't have been, and knew it was something that was wrong, but didn't feel as though I was in a position to do anything about it or say anything about it. So I didn't. And I think the reason I tell this story is because I think it's important that we learn from our mistakes, and maybe you guys can learn from my mistakes. But when you turn a blind eye to something, like we had a guy who, he was getting hazed, and he sort of resisted a little bit of the hazing, and he got beat up by a couple of guys in the barracks. And I didn't witness it, but I knew, what had happened, and I didn't say anything. And I really regret that, because when somebody joins the military, when they agree or does anything, nobody deserves to be treated with indignity. And I know there's something sexy about it. Oh, back in the day, we got hazed and I went through it, and now you need to go through it. And it's a rite of initiation. That's not really, that's not how a professional modern institution handles things. If you need to instill discipline, you have PT, you have, standards and training and accountability. You don't have junior enlisted mistreating junior enlisted in the barracks. So I think that was a real lesson that I learned. And I think that type of culture that I was a part of, that I regret being a part of, and I understand why I thought that way and behaved that way at the time, because I didn't have any power. I didn't, know how to report it. I didn't know what to do, but I didn't do anything. And I think that type of culture contributes to some of the major problems that the military has faced and continues to face, like the problem with sexual assault that soldiers face, and Marines, airmen, everybody in the military, especially women in the military, who have made a decision to sign up, make sacrifices. They have a goal of contributing to an important mission. They want to be a member of a community. But when we create an insulated culture where abuse or mistreatment is fostered or tolerated, it really undermines the mission. So I guess my answer would be yes, I faced an ethical dilemma. The one that stands out to me is one where I didn't rise to the occasion, and something I'm not proud of. I really, now, as that I'm in my 40s, at the time I probably wouldn't have thought this way, but now that I'm older, you can look back at it retrospectively, and I have kids. I have a 21-year-old daughter. I have a son who's 16, and the idea that they would join the military and then get their butts kicked in the barracks, or get forced to do canteen drills till they throw up, drink canteen water till they throw up, that type of thing. It's horrifying. So I really regret that.
Wow, yes, that sounds like a very tough environment. Now, I was curious, like, how did your NCO leaders or your officer leaders handle that type of hazing environment back then? What was that like?
Well, I think back then it was sort of just taken as being part of what the junior enlisted do, and it was a rite of passage. I think kind of most people knew that this type of thing was going on, but it wasn't really talked about until there was an incident where a soldier got hurt. It was the one I talked about where he got assaulted, resisted a little bit, and got assaulted, and then turns out his parents had some influence and started to complain. And then after that happened, the institution did respond. The unit I was in, where they brought in, and I attribute to my commanders for doing this at the time. They identified people who had a lot of credibility in the military in the eyes of me and my fellow soldiers. They've got a couple of special forces guys to come in and just talk about how counterproductive it was, how useless it was. And then they tried to institute rules and regulations to control it and prevent it. There was still a case of, well, this is what I had to do, the same thing. I had to go through that. Why do new guys get to get over and not have to deal with that? But I did, in the short time I was in, just one enlistment, a 4-year enlistment, I did see a change. And I know, based on talking with people who've been in the military since, that change continues to take place. And that's a good thing. Change is never easy, but if we don't learn from our mistakes and take measures to remedy our mistakes, then what's the point, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that story with us. So
not the most uplifting story.
Yeah, no, but it's very eye-opening, and hearing how it was back then, and then how today, how leaders might handle a hazing environment. I think it definitely has changed over time.
I think so. I hope so.
Yes, I agree. So, Mr. Baker, you spent nearly 10 years with the Phoenix Police Department. Is there anything that you learned while on Phoenix Police Department about ethics that you wish you would have known in your 4 years in the military?
Well, I'm not sure that everyone would group this with ethics, but I think it is an important part of being an ethical human being. And it's a term that I've discovered a few years ago, but something that I learned in policing was this idea of having a sociological imagination. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that term before, but basically it's recognizing that the people that you're interacting with on a daily basis, so the people that you serve as a police officer, the victims, the witnesses, but also the suspects, people you're investigating for serious crimes. Sometimes, like I've investigated everything from shopliftings to homicides. Not only was it a useful skill to learn, but I think it made me a better person, and that's activating that sociological imagination. And what I mean by that is recognizing that people are not just actors making rational decisions on their own based on their own self-interests, that a lot of times there are larger forces at play in their lives that shape their behavior. So when someone commits a crime, sure, there's a level of culpability where they made a decision and it may have been wrong, but if you really want to understand what happened and explain what happened and accurately report on what happened, you need to understand all of the forces that were at play. And I think that translates. I really wish I'd thought more. I didn't really think that way when I was in the Army, when I was younger. And I wish I had, because for you guys, when you're leading these young men and women, they're going to be completely dependent on you in ways that you can't even imagine. Even though you're young people yourselves, for the most part, you're going to be entering an environment where someone looks on your collar and they see those bars or that bar. You're the person in charge. You're the person who knows what's going on. You're the person responsible for what happens next. And it's vital that you, as leaders, to be ethical leaders, also recognize the things that your soldiers are facing. You're going to be encountering people from poor communities, people who face major obstacles, people who maybe have not had the same privileges that you guys have had. I'm sure you guys have all faced challenges, but one of the big eye openers for me in the military was how many people that were these wonderful people that wanted to serve, but they also had histories. They also had things that they had to encounter. So I think that lesson that I learned in policing by interviewing, just, interviewing thousands of people who had either been victims, witnesses, or committed crimes themselves, and hearing how these larger forces influence them and shape their behavior. If I'd thought that way when I was in the Army, I think I would have been a better soldier. I think I would have understood the people I was working with when I had respond. I was only in for a short period of time, didn't have much power over other people, but when I did, I think it would have been made me a better leader. And then also, you guys could find yourselves very quickly in a position where you're responsible for being a diplomat in many ways, where you're deployed and you're interacting with leaders and community members in a country you don't understand. It's vital that you have that active sociological imagination, because if you don't think about why it is the people you're interacting with think the way they do, and you can't really understand it, you can't act ethically, you can't make the right decisions. So I think that's vital, and something that policing revealed to me that I wish I'd known in my whole life, and it's also something that I'm still trying to work on. Is recognizing, like now when I have undergraduate students, if I'm responsible, for grading their papers, teaching a class, I try to really take the time to say, you know what, I got up this morning and here's what I faced, but they may very well have faced some other very serious things and maybe dealing with some things I don't understand. And it's important to be sensitive to that. And I don't think when you're dealing with military leadership, hey, be sensitive, guys, isn't necessarily the thing that you hear a lot. But I can tell you that the strongest leaders that I had, the people I respected the most, and the people that I would have, like, if they said go take that, bunker, I would have been, running full speed ahead because I trusted them implicitly. And those were the people that were the thinking leaders, were the people who, really thought about why people were doing what they were doing, were considerate, respectful, and tried to really understand when people were having difficulties, why they were, and tried to help them.
Thank you for that, Mr. Baker. And while we're on the topic of you spending time in law enforcement, you did mention something about an encounter you had that you had to use deadly force. Now, to my understanding, in Phoenix is a large city. Typically, larger cities, that means more crime. And compared to a smaller rural area, some police departments, like in Phoenix, going for your weapon and using deadly force may be an option that happens on a daily, while on the other side, in a rural area, some officers might not even take their gun out of their holster for their whole career. Can you talk about what was your feeling in that encounter when you had to use deadly force? What was going through your body? How was that for you?
Well, for me, one of the stranger things was, so yeah, I think you're right. It depends on policing is not that dangerous a profession. If you look at like fish, if you go fishing, there's a lot of work on power lines. There are careers that are a lot more dangerous than policing, but not always. There are some places where policing is a really dangerous job. It's there are high volume areas, lots of homicides. Phoenix back in the 2000s, when I was coming up in policing, it was like the #2 city in the world for kidnappings. It was a huge distribution point for both illegal drugs coming up from Mexico, and also a human trafficking trail. So we had drop houses all over the city. People were kidnapping drug dealers, kidnapping migrants, holding people hostage, shooting people, killing them, just all kinds of horrible stuff. It was a really violent time, and we encountered a lot of violence at work. So I got into shooting, and then 2 months later, the guy next to me had to shoot. We got into in another shooting. So, and then over the course of my career, I responded or made backups on multiple officer-involved shootings, where I have friends who've policed in other environments where, yeah, like pulling your gun out was a rare thing. Where I worked, it was, most every day there was a traffic stop where we had our guns out and got people at gunpoint. In terms of how it felt, and I think there's a lesson to be learned here, is how important training is. So in those moments where in that moment where I had to make the decision to pull the trigger and shoot somebody, I was faced with a situation where I made a decision that it was either me or them, that I was going to have to shoot them to stop them from hurting me. And when I made that decision, I wasn't actually, I didn't feel as though I was thinking anymore. It was more of like seeing my body go through the motions and execute the skill sets that I had created. So that the training that I had done. So all of that time on the range in the Army, all of the time on the range in policing, the time I'd spent on the mats learning jujitsu and controlling human bodies through time and space, all of those things prepared me to handle that high stress encounter and to implement the skills that were necessary to survive. And I don't really have any regrets in terms of the decisions that I made. But one thing I'm really happy about is that I took the time to train. And the same goes for you guys when you deploy, when you face adversity, and the blood is pumping and you're feeling overwhelmed. I firmly believe that you're gonna react the way you trained. So focus on your training, focus on developing the skills that you need to be successful, and make sure that the men and women that you lead also are given the time to learn and reinforce those skills.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that experience with us. And that's definitely no easy situation for any officer, I would think. And there's definitely times where, as a leader, that anyone can get into a very stressful situation where they might have to take someone else's life. I really appreciate you connecting training, your military training, to your time as a police officer as well, because during our time in ROTC, that's all we train. That's all we do is we train, 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 and we try to get the repetitions in. So we appreciate you hammering that home. Thank you for that, Mr. Baker.
And someone just mentioned in the chat, like the thoughts that I was having in that time and witnessing myself behave, it didn't mean that I wasn't under stress. You know, I was still under a great deal of stress, like my weapon mounted light that I had at the time. So it was nighttime, so I had my gun up and I was using my thumb to activate a light to illuminate the interior of the apartment. And I was so amped up and full of adrenaline that I had ripped the tactical light off of the gun with my thumb, and and it went tumbling down the stairs. I didn't even realize that I was, and it would take a significant amount of force to pull that off, but I didn't realize I was doing it. So when you get in those types of situations, you may not even be aware of how much stress you're under. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it also comes down to trusting that officer to the side of you, that battle buddy in the military sense to the side of you. So thank you for sharing that. So we talk a little bit about trust and ethics. To you, Mr. Baker, why do you think it's equally important for a team leader or a subordinate to trust their team leader or squad leader as compared to many of us are going to be a PL straight out of college with no experience?
right. So I think that soldiers, they know that sergeants run the Army. You know, it's the non-commissioned officers that run the Army, and they recognize and are aware and talk about how how officers, especially young officers, interact with the NCOs that they respect the most. So think about it this way: if you're a soldier in a military unit and you really look up to Sergeant Sadbury, the sergeant that I talked about, and you think he's the baddest man alive, who has stood up for you, who you trust implicitly, and who you know has been doing that for 10 years and really knows what they're doing, you're going to closely interrogate the way that a new lieutenant, who, like I said, just went to college and comes to a unit, how they interact with that sergeant. So yes, they're in charge. The lieutenant is working with their commanders. they're coming up with plans. They're worried about logistics. They're making sure people get the beans and the bullets they need at the place they need to, and they're at the place they need to be, and they have the resources that they need. But the actual implementation, making sure that the troops get fed, making sure that those rounds are on target, that's the NCOs. So I think it's about recognizing that as a lieutenant, you're not in charge of those privates and specialists directly. You're in charge of those NCOs, and it's a relationship. It's a reciprocal relationship. As a lieutenant, you're in charge, yes, but you have an obligation to them to make sure that they have what they need to do their jobs effectively. And you also have if you're a wise leader, you recognize that they're the keepers of that institutional wisdom. They're the people who know how things are getting done. So I think it's vital that obviously you're in charge, you make command decisions. That's absolutely necessary. But if you don't show that respect to those, especially those senior NCOs, and you don't take advantage of them as and their institutional knowledge and take time to learn from them, then you're doing yourself and you're doing all of your soldiers a disservice. It's going to be more difficult to earn the respect of the men and women that you're in charge of, because they're going to see that you don't respect the people that they respect the most. But also you're missing an opportunity. Like Sergeant Sadbury knew more about soldiering than any lieutenant could possibly know, and if he was approached and treated with respect and dignity, he knew his place, he knew his role, and wanted to be an effective partner, and knew that his success was dependent upon his lieutenant, but it wasn't going to work unless it was both ways. And I think we quite often we get into this in military and paramilitary organizations like policing. We can very easily, default to this idea that, well, just because you're in charge means you're the most important, that you're the leader. But being an effective leader is recognizing leadership in others and empowering them and facilitating their success and learning from them, even if they don't have the same weight on their collar that you might.
Sergeant Sadbury sounds like a great guy.
Yeah, I actually found him on social media a couple of years ago and touched base with him. And he put me in touch with a guy who beat me up pretty bad at a boxing competition one time. So that's
No, that's awesome. That's great. Thank you for providing that perspective, because the relationship between officers and NCOs, that's it's founded on trust and making sure that trust is there. And at the end of the day, it's mission success. That's the goal. So that's great that you point that out.
And I just to say one other thing is that there's a temptation, and I did witness this once in particular, where there was a new lieutenant in the chow hall who an officer said to them, pay attention, just listen to, I can't remember which sergeant it was, and he'll make sure you're squared away. It was a new lieutenant, and he was talking to the officer, oh, don't worry, I'll make sure Sergeant so-and-so is squared away. And it was sort of a joking sort of comment, but it was a sign of weakness in my eyes, and I think in a lot of the other men it was an all-male unit, because it just showed that this person was insecure in their position. And if you're a new lieutenant and you show up at a unit and you are so worried about letting everyone know that you're the lieutenant and you're in charge, that's just going to show to everyone that you're insecure in your position. The much bigger leader and whole leader is the type of person that is willing to recognize their weakness and inexperience and rely on others. And that's very difficult to do. Even for me nowadays, asking for help, saying, hey, I don't know how to do this. This is difficult. Those are very difficult things to do. But the people who are able to do that are usually the stronger people. So I think that if you want to display strength and and a capacity for leadership to the people you're going to be serving and leading, then making it clear to them that you respect people who know more than you, even if they're not officers, it's not the captain or some colonel, it's the sergeant who's been doing it for years.
Wow, thank you for that. I appreciate that, Mr. Baker. So that was just awesome that you said that. It seems like everything cumulative of ROTC was just like boiled down to that, because that's all we really try to focus on is building that relationship. NCO. I hear a lot that when you're a new platoon leader, you don't know it, right? You got to learn it. And you learn that from the NCOs. So I'm glad that you spoke on that. You really made that clear. So what advice would you give to a junior leader getting ready to commission in the United States Army? And how can they be successful with their careers?
Well, I think it's something I just talked about, obviously, relying on your NCOs. I think that's key. Then another big thing is that sociological imagination, making sure that you're trying to be aware of these larger forces and understanding those will make you more effective. But I think at a human level, because you guys are going to go in, some of you may be in there for, just to your time, to you serve your time. Some of you will make it careers. Some of you may be, way up in leadership, but you're all going to be done at some point. You're going to leave the military. And as you're entering this experience and you're about to have control over people's lives, remember that that the impacts of that are going to carry on long after you leave the military. So you're going to think back on the way you behaved. You're going to remember the type of leader you were, the times that you failed, the times that you were successful, but the people that you interact with are going to be impacted by you. I mean, if you're going to be in charge, you could have long lasting effects on the soldiers you're in charge of and the civilians that you interact with on deployment or in the community. So just trying to not be completely in the moment and take the time to think, how is this going to feel when I'm an older man or an old woman? Is this something I'm going to be able to live with? Is this something that my kids or my grandkids are going to be proud of? Is this something that I would want my mom to know about? Because the decisions that you make, and no matter what you do, but especially in something like the military or the police department, the decisions that you make are going to live with you for the rest of your life and with other people for the rest of their lives. So they're important. And these little blips in the pond, these things that you don't think are that important, they have an effect on the people around you, and that those people then affect the people around them, and those ripples in the pond can cover an entire pond. So just be aware of that and be thoughtful about what you're doing, and just always ask that question. This is about ethics, and say, is this the right thing to do? Am I going to be able to live with this? And let that be your guide your decision making.
Thank you. We're very fortunate of that. Given that ROTC, we have a lot of potential platoon leaders. So hearing that perspective from you was great. And I'm taking a look at the Q&A box right here. Seems like we got a couple of questions coming in. Let's see if we can get these answered. All right.
All righty.
So we have one question from an audience member that says, how is decision making similar or different between the military and police with regards to the use of deadly force?
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot of similarities. When you're deployed with a military unit, you have rules of engagement, and those rules of engagement are dictated by the situation you're in, the intensity of if you're in combat, they're much looser than if you're in a city trying to maintain order. And that line between law enforcement and policing can get kind of murky nowadays with the military when we've been deployed for so long, and we're on our operation is about maintaining stability in a country. They can be the same thing, policing and the military. I think that the difference is that the standards on deployment are more, they change on a regular basis. So commanders make decisions based on the situation on the ground about what is and what is not acceptable. But in the United States, when it comes to police use of deadly force, those rules are less fluid. They're embedded in the legal structure. So the Supreme Court decisions that have been made in criminal court cases have set precedent, and that just can't change overnight. Whereas in the military, the commanders on the ground can say, hey, this is, we're going to lower the rules of engagement. Okay, things have changed for political reasons to meet our mission objective. And I don't say political in a negative way, because the use of military force is it's politics by other means, right? It's achieving a political objective with the use or threat of military force. So with the military, those can change depending on the situation, whereas with the police, it's a much slower process. So it does change over long periods of time through policy, through law, but it's not as, it doesn't change as quickly as it does in the military.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. We have another question from a Samuel Chitero. It says, I recently began working with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms for a credit in my university. I'm curious to hear your opinion on this question. Aside from the training they receive, why is there a much bigger issue with local law enforcement from the public than there is with a federal law enforcement agency?
Well, I think that the big thing for that is the number of contacts that you're dealing with. So in the United States, there's no one knows, but there's 18,000 police departments in the United States. Only a handful of those organizations are federal law enforcement agencies like the ATF. And a significant amount of the interactions that take place where an ATF objective is being pursued is via local law enforcement. So when the ATF is conducting an investigation, there may be a couple of ATF agents, but more likely than not, there are cross-trained local police officers who also have some certification or relationship with the ATF that help facilitate and carry out their mission. So when you look at the total, all of the contacts that are happening across the United States between civilians and the police, the overwhelming majority of those are with municipal, state, and county level law enforcement officers. So I just don't think there are enough enough repetitions to produce the number of politically sensitive issues as there is with local police department. And I also think that there's just it's a higher level of operation and more predictable with an organization like the ATF. They typically know they may be dealing with really dangerous people, but they know who they're dealing with before they contact them. Usually they're conducting a follow-up investigation, they're doing surveillance, they have more information available. Whereas with a local cop, like with my shooting, I got dispatched to a domestic violence call. All we know is the guy's hitting his wife. Go stop it. So you don't have the information, you don't have the as many resources. You have to deal with, you're dealing with this over and over and over again through the course of a shift. Whereas an ATF agent is going to spend much more time behind a desk doing investigations, going out, working with local law enforcement to track people down. So I think it's mostly a matter of exposure. That would be my answer to that.
Thank you. That was actually pretty great. I like that. I think most of it, local law enforcement, they're more out there. I think that's huge. We don't really see much. We don't walking around. We don't drive around. We know that's an FBI agent or a DEA or an ATF agent. I think local law enforcement, they're really out there. Their presence is out there. So
right, and think about what would you have to do to come into contact with local law enforcement? I mean, you could speed, don't get your tags renewed, get in an argument with your partner and the neighbors call the police, your music's too loud, You just call because someone in your house is having a mental health crisis. Whereas if it's an ATF agent, there's got to be a lot that goes into that. There's got to be cases generated, and then the ATF is contacted. They launch an investigation. It's a much smaller pool of people that they're dealing with.
Yes, absolutely. We have a couple more questions coming in as well. We have one that says, as a future soldier, I realize that I may be confronted with a similar situation as you were in, where deadly force may be necessary for survival. Can you talk about how you dealt with it after? How did it affect you? And how did you have any changes you had to overcome?
Well, to be honest, I didn't think that I would have an issue with it. And for immediately afterwards, I was fine with it. It was just, good. I'm glad that worked out the way it did. My training kicked in. It was a legitimate decision that I made. It was the right decision. And I didn't make the decision. It was somebody else that was trying to hurt me. So I did what I needed to do to survive. But as time went by, I did start to experience changes in the way I was behaving and feeling, some issues with sleeping, the traditional sort of things, some of the things you'd think of as, post-traumatic stress type symptoms. Medicated that with alcohol when I shouldn't have. So it did create problems. Luckily, I have an amazing supportive spouse. 25th or 24th. I messed that up. 24th. I didn't make a mistake. 24th wedding anniversary coming up here this weekend. So all of that support, and then also like the Tillman Foundation. Going to them and saying, hey, I've got this goal, this thing I want to do, and having this network of people that are supporting you and depending on you. That gives you the strength that you need to be a better person, better man for me. So what I would say is that you may very well, I know people who've been in shootings and it's fine, like they deal with it fine. And then I know other people have had a real difficult time. I guess, I could count myself in that group. And I would suggest that if you're going to be working in this type of environment, that it's really key to have a strong network and support group, people around you who you love and respect and trust, and who will be there for you no matter what. That's one of the great things about the military, is that you're going to meet people and have those types of relationships that you won't have in other environments, like going out into the field and sleeping outside and being cold and hungry and having things really suck. Alongside someone builds a special bond. Like my buddy Travis, who I was in the Army with, we still talk every week. We have a special bond. I remember curling up next to my buddy Jake Carnes to stay warm in the field. And that's a special bond, being cold together, being hungry together, or going through trauma together, I think it's like the band of brothers idea. There's something special about enduring suffering together. So make sure that you have people around you that you want to endure those things with, in case it happens.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. It's very special. Now, you just mentioned the Tillman Foundation, and we can see that your backdrop is the Pat Tillman Foundation. For those audience members out there that may not know what the Tillman Foundation is or who Pat Tillman is, can you talk about that briefly?
Sure. So I put it up there. The window is open right now. So if you're on active duty, you guys know somebody who's on active duty. If you guys know somebody who's a veteran, whether it was in active duty or reserves, and they're pursuing higher education, either undergraduate level or graduate level, the application window is open right now. And they provide a substantial amount of money to support your studies. They also have a strong network of leaders around the world who are part of this organization that support one another and help further each other's careers. And they also offer opportunities, like they'll pay for you to go to conferences, to leadership, for the things that you need to be successful. In terms of and they do this for people that they identify as working on important social issues or making a significant contribution to the world, and whose future is about service, who want to serve their community either after the military or while they're still in the military. So if any of you guys check out the website. If any of you guys meet the eligibility requirements, be sure to apply. In terms of where the organization comes from, Pat Tillman, he was a football player. He played for the Arizona Cardinals, was a really good linebacker. I think he played outside linebacker and a little bit of safety. Hopefully I'm not messing up his position. And he and his brother, he turned down millions of dollars and joined the military and deployed to Afghanistan, and it was a complicated type of thing. So he wasn't necessarily completely in support of of what was happening politically, but he was the type of person who said it's not fair that young men and women from around the country be called to serve, but people who have NFL contracts and or have money, they don't have to contribute. He felt a sense of duty and said, I'm gonna do my part and contribute. And he was killed overseas by friendly fire. There was a government cover up, and he was his story was used in an inappropriate way, in an unethical sort of way. And his widow, Marie Tillman, who was so impacted by his life, decided that she wanted to continue on his work of inspiring people. So she created this foundation, and over the years, they've gone about identify 60 people per year and support them through their education. And then when you're done your education, you still maintain your relationship with the community, and we all try to work together to help each other on the issues that we're facing. And it's an amazing group of people. Sometimes when I go there, I'm like, really? Like, why? I don't belong here. Like, these people are pretty exceptional. Like our poster boy right now is Johnny Kim. He's a Navy SEAL. He gets out of the SEALs and he goes to Harvard Medical School, goes to NASA, becomes an astronaut, and now he's scheduled to go to the moon here in 2022 or 2024. So you're around these incredible people, and it's just such a valuable resource. Besides the financial resources, it's the network that you become in touch with. Like, for example, I just had a couple months ago, I had a question about automated vehicles. I had some questions about how they might be used to reduce police-involved shootings. And I had some questions. I just was able to reach out to the network. Someone in our group studies automated vehicle systems at MIT. And within a day, I was on a Zoom call brainstorming with them, asking them questions. More recently, I had a young man who was interested in working for SpaceX, doing an internship. And I thought he was an outstanding young person. So I was able to reach out to the network and find a mission commander at SpaceX who's part of our group and put them in touch. So it's not only you that is impacted by being a part of that type of a group, but it's also the people around you. You can really help. I'm in a rural Missouri town. So being connected to a group like that, it doesn't just help me, it helps the people around me in my town.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. I see one here that's actually about your studies here at St. Louis. So the question says, could you elaborate on your research in St. Louis surrounding the Michael Brown shooting and the use of deadly force? How has your policing and military experience affected your research and your point of view?
So I think it's the big thing is that a lot of people who are studying something like policing, and they haven't seen the nuts and bolts on a daily basis of how it actually works, may not be equipped to ask the best questions. So I would say that my biggest advantage that comes from my policing experience is my ability to ask questions, and then to look at the way things are being put into practice in research where it just doesn't make sense, where I'm like, that's not the way it actually is. That doesn't make any sense. And they're drawing conclusions based off of research where the variables that they're using are nonsensical. So like an example was there's a lot of research, something I'm working on now. there's a lot of research where people will say domestic violence cases are the most dangerous, or robbery cases are the most dangerous. You're the most likely to end up in a shooting. But they'll treat those categories as mutually exclusive. So when they look at an incident, they'll say, okay, well, the officer was responding to a domestic violence call. Oh, in this case, they were responding to a robbery call. In this case, they were going to a burglary call. When in reality, anyone who's got in a patrol car for a day or two, they realize that every time you go to one of these calls, there's usually multiple things happening at once. So you're responding to a domestic violence call, yes, but the guy also has a warrant. The guy also has a gun. He did a burglary yesterday, and you have probable cause for that. And then when you get there, he's in a vehicle and he's leaving, so you do a traffic stop. So really, that incident is like 6 different things. But when you look at the research, people are classifying it as these single, mutually exclusive categories. And once you realize how police actually function, you can't take any of those findings seriously. So I would say that the experience allows me to turn a critical eye to existing research and identify problems, and then also to ask more interesting and practical questions that will be relevant to patrol officers, because I know what it's like to be a patrol officer. I know what it's like to answer calls and to, so using that experience to inform the questions and to add a critical lens to my analysis of existing research.
That was awesome. Thank you. We're going to have to wrap it up for tonight, Mr. Baker. We are very fortunate to have you on this evening. Thank you for that. Is there any final thoughts you have that you would like to leave with our viewers?
I guess just thank you. I know it's been a crazy time this past year, especially, but coming to a place like this and interacting with you guys and in the questions and seeing young people who are dedicated to service and want to do the right thing, it's inspiring, and it's a very hopeful thing. So thank you so much for your service, and I really wish you all the best. Be safe and make sure that you take care of the people who you have power over.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. There you have it, folks. Mr. Baker, Tillman Scholar, former Army Ranger, former law enforcement. Thank you for your time tonight. It was an honor and privilege to having you here. On behalf of the Steel Battalion, we would like to offer you a ticket of appreciation, little Steel Battalion gear next time you go out. And there's actually some goodies in here that we'll be sending that off to you. All right. So thank you.
Sweet. I love swag. Thank you.
Yeah, some swag for you. So have a nice night, everyone. Forge and fire.